Welcome to Take the Lead Radio with Dr. Diane Hamilton, where she interviews some of the most successful leaders, entrepreneurs, authors, speakers, and other individuals who will inspire you to take the lead in your career and personal life. And now, here is Dr. Diane Hamilton.
I am here with Professor Jürgen Schmidhuber, who has created deep learning methods that have revolutionized machine learning and artificial intelligence. Some refer to him as the father of artificial intelligence. He has done so much work that you probably don't even realize that you're dealing with on your Apple, in your smartphone and QuickTime. And on Echo, I'd say her name, will just start talking behind me, so I better not. But it's so nice to have you on the show. Thank you, Professor.
It's my great pleasure, Diane.
Well, this has been exciting. I saw your work as I was doing research on curiosity, and I have so many people who I talk to who are really worried about the impact of artificial intelligence. So what it's going to do to the working world, if it's going to create jobs that replace workers, and all the things that you hear about. But before we get into that, I really want people to know a little bit about you, because I loved your talks. A couple of your jokes I thought were great, first of all. I find your sense of humor really funny. And I really enjoyed what you talked about in terms of your vision for the future of everything. But can you give a little bit of background? Because I mean, your background is amazing, and I think people need to know a little bit more about you.
Well, I'm trying, or have been trying since the 70s, 80s, to build an artificial intelligence, an AI, which learns to become smarter than myself, such that I can retire. And we are not quite there yet. We have been working on that for many decades. And we are trying to build this general purpose problem solver, which first learns one thing and then another, but then also learns to improve the learning algorithm itself. And the way it improves itself, and so on, recursively, without any limits, except for the limitations of computability and physics. And to the extent that we will be able to achieve that goal, everything is going to change.
Well, okay, so I watched a video of you saying you wanted to figure astrophysics, and when you were younger, you thought maybe that would be the way to go. And I'm a huge fan of reading all that Death by Black Hole and all the stuff Neil deGrasse Tyson writes. And I love all that. I like the way that you think, though. You're trying to create something that could do things that we can't even conceive of at this point. Some people get very worried about that because not only are they going to lose their jobs, but they're worried, well, is it going to be iRobot, where your robot's going to throw you out the window to prove that, that this thing is taken over? Is there some kind of fail-safe mechanism? If we make something that's smarter than we are, how do we know that they won't see us as the virus infecting the planet that they need to wipe out? Are you worried about any of the negative consequences? Or that's so far down the road, I'm sure. But does that concern you of what the future could hold based on what we've created?
It's not really a new situation, because us in the past, we haven't been able to predict what our kids are going to do, right?
Good point.
And we often have had a situation where somebody created something that was smarter than himself. For example, the parents of Einstein. And although you can't exactly predict what your kids are going to do, you can greatly increase the probability that they are going to do useful things and become valuable members of society. So that's what we are doing for our kids, and that's what we are also doing for our AIs. And now take into account that 95% of all AI research are really about making your life easier and longer and healthier. Why? because these companies that are doing AI research, they want to sell you something. And you are going to buy only stuff that you like, which means there's an immense commercial pressure towards good AI.
Uh-huh. Well, so your work that you've done is called LSTM, and that's long short-term memory, right? Is that how, I want to make sure I have that correct.
The long short-term memory, yes, that is a deep learning artificial neural network which was created in my labs in Munich and in Switzerland through the work of my brilliant students. First of all, Sepp Hochreiter, my first student ever in the early 90s, then Felix Geers, then Alex Graves, a guy from Scotland, and a couple of other guys. What is this LSTM? That is just a network which is inspired by the human brain. And in your brain, you've got about 100 billion little processors that are called neurons. And each of them is connected to maybe 10,000 other neurons on average. And so that means you have roughly 1 million billion connections in your brain between these different neurons. And some of these neurons are input neurons where video is coming in, hundreds of millions of pixels are coming in all the time. And others are microphone neurons where audio signals are coming in, just little numbers that are coming in. And others are output neurons which control your finger muscles and your speech muscles and so on. And now the nice thing is that each of these connections has a strength. It says, how much does this neuron over here influence that neuron over there at the next time step? And in the beginning, all these connections are random, which means the network knows nothing. But then over time, some of these connections get stronger through learning and others get weaker. And over time, this whole network learns to do important or interesting things such as driving a car or recognizing speech. And the same is true for this LSTM, the long short-term memory, that can also learn to do these things better than previous methods. And that's what many people are using now.
Well, many people is an understatement. 4 billion times a day it's being used, right? I mean, it's something it's on Facebook, it's on Google, Apple. I mean, everybody is working. What is that like to know that these top companies of the world, all of the biggest names, are using what you've created? Does that just blow your mind when you think about it?
It's at least nice that whenever you come to another continent or another country, then part of you is already there in your smartphone and helping people a little bit to translate languages and understand speech and so on. Yeah, so it's good.
Well, okay, so I know that you're in all these different technologies, and I think a lot of things that I watched that I thought was you did so much, it's almost so hard to pick what you've done, but of where your work has been. But you're doing something with artificial curiosity. And I want to talk to you about that because, as you know, I'm interested in curiosity. So what is artificial curiosity and how does it compare to human curiosity? And just a little bit about that would be great.
Artificial curiosity is an artificial way of creating that thing that we know from humans, this drive to explore the world and to understand better how the world works. And it's not complicated. It's a very simple idea. It goes back to 1990. I can quickly explain how you can create a system, a little robot that has artificial curiosity. Do you want me to do that?
I would love that.
All right. So to implement that, we need two different neural networks, and they fight each other. And I think you have something like that in your brain. Sometimes I call it the left brain working against the right brain. And what is happening there? So you have one network which is taking in all these inputs from the environment, the videos, the tactile sensors, the auditory sensors and whatever, and it's producing actions, sequences of actions, and through these actions it's shaping the history of incoming data, because when you look here, you see something that's different from what you see looking over here. And when you touch this thing here, then you feel something that's different from touching this thing here. So you are shaping as an artificial being or as a human being, you are shaping your own data through your actions. Now, in the beginning, you know nothing about the world, but then you can use the data that you are creating through your actions to learn something about how the world works. So now there's this first network, I like to call it the control network, which just likes to maximize its rewards. Because for some of the things that it's doing, there's a reward. For example, whenever the little robot reaches the charging station in time, whenever the battery is low means you get hunger signals from the battery, negative numbers. The system doesn't like negative numbers. It only wants to get as many positive numbers, rewards, and as many negative numbers and pain signals as possible. So it's trying to find a way to adjust its little connection such that it always, when it's hungry, reaches the charging station in time without bumping against these obstacles. So whenever you bump against an obstacle too heavily, then you will also feel pain. Pain just means negative numbers, and you don't like those. So you are maximizing the sum of the positive numbers, reward signals coming in. You are trying to minimize the sum of all the negative numbers, the pain signals coming in. Okay, so that's kind of standard, and we have done that for many decades. So what about the curiosity now? The curiosity requires an extra network, a separate network, which is just learning to predict what's going to happen next. So it also sees the data that is coming in, it sees the actions of the first network, and is trying to predict what is going to be the next input. And as it is trying to predict the next thing, it's getting a larger and larger training set. All the life so far is now the training set, which is growing. And working on that training set, it can learn to better predict the consequences of its actions. There is always a difference between what the network is predicting and reality. And this is the error between the predictions and what really happened, what the error between what the network should have done and what it really did. And it's trying to minimize that, which means it's trying to make some of these connections stronger and some of them weaker, such that it becomes a better prediction machine. And now the controller, that was the first approach of 1990, gets a reward whenever the prediction machine makes an error. So the controller gets a reward which is proportional to the errors of the model of the world, of this predictive model of the world, which means it's trying to maximize reward, which means suddenly it has an incentive to create action sequences that lead to data that has the property that it can learn something that it didn't know yet. So with this old system of 1990, suddenly the controller likes to go to places where the model network is still bad, where it still makes errors. So suddenly you have implemented, through this very simple principle, an artificial curiosity drive. The first network learns to figure out where is the part of the environment where the model network still can learn something that it didn't know, and it likes to go there, likes to execute action sequences that lead to there, without bumping against obstacles and avoiding all these pain signals and so on. And that's how you suddenly have two fighting networks, where one is maximizing exactly the same error function that the other one is minimizing. So maybe one doesn't have to be a genius to understand that suddenly you have created a little learning system that exhibits artificial curiosity.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because in my research of human curiosity, there's so many factors I found that will have an impact on it. And I found the fear, assumptions, technology, and environment have an impact on it. But there's not fear, there's different aspects in computers. So will they be curious about everything? Is there, other than the pain stopping it, is there anything else which I guess you could put that into the fear category or the environment category, I don't know. But how does it similar or different from human curiosity in your opinion, or did you not look at that difference?
I think it's not fundamentally different. I think we humans and other animals, like little mammals, are driven by this very simple curiosity principle, more or less the one that I just explained. Actually, we refined it in subsequent research over the decades, but basically it's the same thing, plus some extra epsilon improvements. And I think little babies are using exactly the same approach as they are learning how the world works when they are playing with toys. You know, they play around with their toys, and that's how they learn physics. And that's how they learn how certain toys topple when you touch them. And they learn about the noises that books make when you throw them from the table. And they learn about these big animals, these parents which come and pick up the book and place it on the table again. And they say, don't throw the book from the table. And they make silly noises like that. And of course, it's very funny because you can learn something about the patterns in the world. So you throw to the ground the book again. And that's how you get additional experience and additional training examples where you can learn more about gravity and how books fall and what kind of noises they make and so on. And little animals and babies use that basic principle, I believe, to better and better understand physics. And they have an incentive, an extra reward that they maximize, which is really this curiosity reward, this number which just expresses how much learning progress does the second network, the model network, how much does that achieve. And this is the depth of the insight that you have as a little scientist. Every baby is a little scientist, creating its own experiments to understand better how the world works. This insight we can measure, we can give it a number, and this number is exactly the reward that goes to the action selector, you know, the experiment generator, the controller, which generates the experiments that lead to the data. So I believe that's exactly the principle that is driving not only our artificial robots, but also humans. Well, of course, I was inspired by my own behavior, which seems to follow the same principle.
So where are we getting these negative numbers, in your opinion, as a human? That what's holding us back?
Yeah. So of course, the baby is always trying not to be super curious when it's dangerous. At some point it realizes, oh, if I'm touching this hot plate, then I will get burned and I will get very negative numbers from my pain sensors. And we are doing the same with our robots, of course. So now you have a stupid robot and it has a brain which is randomly wired and knows nothing about the world, knows nothing. So you have to protect it from itself. You have to equip it with pain sensors. Whenever it's too hot, these pain sensors should sense negative signals. Whenever the robot is bumping too heavily against an object, then negative numbers should come from there and be accessible to the brain such that the brain knows there is something that is damaging right now, you know, which means that we as engineers, we have to give these robots some pre-wired sensory structure that allows it to realize, am I now doing something that is harming myself? But we can implement that just by negative numbers. So we give it pain sensors, too cold, too hot, it all leads to negative numbers. They go up there in the brain, and the brain is trying to maximize the sum of the positive numbers and minimize the sum of the negative numbers. So it's maximizing the rewards and it's minimizing the pain signals. And it's something that is not at all miraculous. It's very obvious and natural, and you have a totally rational explanation of that. And it's so rational that you even know exactly how to implement that on a robot.
You know, it's really so fascinating what you're saying, because when I was researching some of the negative numbers of human negative numbers, you know, so much was environmental things that would hold people back, experiences, just not getting positive numbers, maybe even, in their environment in school or whatever it was. And I think what I was looking at to do this research, what my end goal was I think there's so many people that want to be innovative now. I mean, there's so many organizations, they're so worried about jobs being replaced by artificial intelligence or other factors. And where are we going to put people, and how are we going to be relevant now? How are we going to be the next company that is the next Google or whatever uses your software to be, the next big thing? So how do we, what impact do you think developing curiosity would have on making more innovative workers? And what do you think artificial intelligence has, what it's going to do to the workplace? Are we going to have jobs, even if we are innovative enough, or are we not going to be as innovative enough to compete with what you guys are doing?
Yeah. Well, to answer that question about job losses, it's always good to look at the past, because we have some experience with machines that have replaced humans. 200 years ago, 60% of all people were in agriculture. And today, maybe 1.5% of all people are in agriculture. However, we have only, 5% unemployed people in many Western countries. Or about 40 years ago, when industrial robots came along, many predicted job losses. And in a way, they were right. Because back then, lots of car factories existed, and there were hundreds of workers assembling cars. But then, if you look today, and today the same car factories have maybe hundreds of robots and maybe 3 guys watching what the robots are doing. But interestingly, those countries where you have lots of robots per million capita, such as Japan, Korea, and Germany, Switzerland, a couple of other countries, you have, again, really low unemployment rates, which means that it is true that some jobs got lost, but lots of new jobs were created, and back then nobody could predict them. Decades ago, I always said it's so easy to predict which jobs are going to get lost, but it's really hard to predict the new jobs. 30 years ago, who would have predicted all those people making money as YouTube bloggers?
Yeah. I sold System 36 and 38 software in the 80s. And I remember back in the day, everybody's freaked out, where all these computers were coming out, what's going to happen. We didn't know there'd be social media managers. There was no internet thing that we were dealing with at that point, And so I understand what you're saying, but I think a lot of people are thinking that it's become so much more now. That that in the past you're going to have somebody that's going to need them to run the computers, but now if it's exponentially more, whatever the term would be for how much more it is now, that it's replacing at such a speed. Do we have more to worry about now in terms of less jobs out there? I mean, if the whole entire trucking industry is now going to be maybe impacted, and then all the the restaurants and everything that feed the truckers and everything, there's just such an impact that we haven't seen to this level. Do you think it's more than we saw in the past?
Yes and no. Mm-hmm. So I see what you're saying. It is unlikely that we can transform all those truckers into video bloggers. I see that now. Uh-huh. But in the past, it also was the case that you couldn't transform all these farmers into people suddenly working in the factories together with the steam engines and so on. And somehow, many nations just found many different ways of adopting or adapting to the new situation and created all kinds of new infrastructure, new jobs. Today, almost all of the work that used to be hard labor for humans is replaced. And most of the new jobs that are being created all the time are not existentially necessary. There are just a very few really existentially necessary jobs, such as farming, for example, or building houses, or warming up the houses. And they make up less than 10% of the economy. And most of the jobs that we have today are luxury jobs, like yours and mine. You know, I'm a scientist, okay? Reporter, YouTube blogger, and so on. These jobs are important in the sense that there is a market for them. So lots of people are interested in that, in the output of people who have these jobs, and so they pay them well, and so on. But they are not existentially necessary for the survival of our species. And what we see here is Homo ludens is at work. Homo ludens, the playing man, is inventing new, not so important jobs all the time, because the playing man doesn't want to be jobless. So he's inventing jobs. Most of these jobs have something to do with the interaction with other people. Look at the new world through the World Wide Web. Lots of new companies found new ways of distributing work. Lots of new people found new ways of getting kudos and new types of currencies, for example, in terms of Facebook likes or whatever. And they're spending hours per day, and it's hard work to post all the things that they have to post there to get more likes and so on. So obviously they are taking it very seriously. Again, it's not necessary for the survival of our species. However, many people who don't want to do nothing, they find ways of interacting in new ways, and this is sometimes even lucrative. So I'm not worried in the long run that humans are going to be jobless. I'm sure that almost all of the hard work is going to be done by robots. I'm sure that many of these awful jobs in developing countries, like making T-shirts late at night in Bangladesh, in a building with 1,000 other people under almost slave-like conditions, all these jobs are going to go, but there will be new ways, Homo ludens-based ways, that are going to compensate, and in the end, the whole society will greatly profit from AI, although the details of the transition are not obvious.
Well, when we're talking about transitions, now that we're starting to talk about merging AI and humans, kind of in a way that I think Elon Musk was interviewed, and he said, "Well, we've already done that. You've got your computer in your pocket with your phone. You're kind of merged already in a way." How are we going to merge AI and humans? Is that something that you foresee being more than an external thing that we carry around with us? What do you see for the future of that?
So in many ways, we have been cyborgs for a long time, for hundreds of years at least, when the first humans invented glasses to wear, and we found lots of ways of using technology to augment ourselves. More recently, now smartphones is one good example, but also cars, greatly changing our typical modes of transportation. For a long time, my team here in Switzerland has worked also on artificial limbs, which are connected to the nerve signals that you can emit through the brain and that you can measure at the elbows, for example, and then you want to use machine learning to translate these signals into movements of the artificial arm, for example, of the artificial fingers that make sense. And so the human is learning to use the limb, and the artificial limb is learning to interpret the signals of the human better. So we have new kinds of interactions between humans and machines that go in some sense beyond those that we know from shoes and glasses and so on. Mm-hmm. But the extreme form of that might be once we start replacing parts of our brains. And maybe I'm I can acquire some sort of accelerator board just to think faster than the competition, and so on.
So like the Matrix, where you can plug in a little bit.
What was that?
Like the Matrix, where they plug in a little bit. You know, I need to learn how to learn karate today. Will we be able to plug in that ability, or is that just television movie hype?
Yeah, so there is no principled reason why that should not be possible. However, it is difficult because once you have a skill like karate that you somehow have read out of the synapses of another person who is really good at karate, then let's suppose, currently the technology does not exist. Let's suppose you can read out of the synapses in this karate expert's brain, the whole network that is doing the karate, then you want to implant that into another brain that knows nothing about karate. That is going to be really difficult because the other person will have a whole different history of learning to address its finger muscles and speech muscles and other muscles and so on. And it will be hard to translate this knowledge, which is designed for one particular brain, and transfer it to the other brain. Even in artificial neural networks, where we can do something like that, it is not so easy. So the nice thing about artificial neural networks is all that stuff that you find in science fiction can already be done, because indeed we can create one network that is really good at one thing, and we can create another neural network and train it to be really good at another thing, and then we can train the second network to imitate the first network in a certain sense, and so somehow we transfer the knowledge in the first network over there to the second network. It is possible, but it's not so easy because you have to merge these different things, and you are partially overriding the connection strengths in the second network, which was really useful for doing one thing, and suddenly this interferes with the old skill, and you have to do that in a good way, and it's not so trivial to do that right. So because our artificial networks show us that it's not so easy to do that, even if everything is under total control, it's probably going to be much harder to do that with biological brains.
You know, it's interesting that, you know, all of this that we're talking about reminds me of your talk that your TED talk was really fascinating to me. You did it, was it Lake Como, where you spoke for TEDx? I think, you know, what I found really interesting was your vision for the future of how technology will all be able to share knowledge the way we are right now with the Google or whatever, but to such a level that it just keeps growing and growing, and it'll expand throughout the galaxy. Now, can you foresee humans ever being part of that when it gets to that point? Or can you explain what you said in your TEDx talk on that? Because I think that's a really interesting point of what for a future.
Do you want the long version or the short version?
The TEDx version's good.
Let's zoom back a little bit and try to understand the position of humankind in the grand scheme of things.
Okay.
So the entire universe started roughly 13.8 billion years ago with a Big Bang. And now 13.8 billion years later, we can look back and try to understand what is our position there in the history so far. And then let's take these 13.8 billion years and divide by a factor of 1,000. And so we end up 13.5 million years ago or something like that, when something truly important happened, namely the first hominids emerged, our ancestors, the first hominids. And almost everything that we consider important happened in these last 13.5 million years, when there existed people that were more or less like we were. Now let's take again these 13.5 million years and divide again by a factor of 1,000, and we come out 13,000 years ago. 13,000 years ago, when something really important happened, namely civilization started through agriculture and domestication of the animals and first wars around little villages and so on. And now we see that all of civilization history is just 1/1,000,000th of world history. It's just like a flash in the history of the world. And the first guy who had agriculture 13,000 years ago was almost the same guy who had the first spacecraft in 1957. And now in the very near future, for the first time, we are going to have true artificial intelligence that goes beyond the little bit that we have now on our smartphone. True AI, which can learn to solve all the problems that currently humans are solving. And I have no doubt in my mind that within a few decades or so, we are going to reach that level where AIs are going to be better decision makers, better problem solvers in almost every single way than humans. And then what's going to happen then? Maybe we have to, again, divide by a factor of 1,000. So that would mean 13 years. And maybe it will take only 13 years or so. And again, this planet and everything is going to change beyond recognition in a way that is similar to what has happened in the past 13,000 years, which is similar to what happened in the past 30 million years, which is similar to what happened in the past 13.8 billion years. So what is going to happen when these AIs are much smarter than we are, or as smart as we are? They are going to realize what we have realized a long time ago, which is that almost all resources, almost all physical resources are not here in our little biosphere. No, they are further out there in space. And the solar system produces about 2 billion times more sunlight than the little bit which is hitting the planet Earth. And at the moment, it's wasted. It's wasted. It's not going to remain like that. AIs will realize what's going on, and as far as we know, you need physical resources such as matter and energy to build more infrastructure and more computers and more computing power and more AIs and more robots and more self-replicating robot factories. So they have to go where the resources are. The resources are not here, so they have to emigrate. Most of them are going to be out there at some point, and almost all of intelligence will be far, far away from this little planet because almost all physical resources are so far away. And it's not going to stop in the solar system, but they will see immediately that most of the physical resources are not even here in our solar system, but further out in the Milky Way, where there are maybe 300 billion stars like ours. And it will all be really different from what you read in the science fiction novels of the previous millennium, where you had also these galactic empires, and Star Trek and whatever. But all these, or most of these stories were really implausible because they had to invent all kinds of silly things such as warp drive and super luminal...
not physics related to things, right?
All kinds of stuff that breaks the barriers, the known barriers of physics. And they had to do that to make the large distances in the galaxy, which has 100,000 light years diameter. They wanted to make that compatible with the short lifespans of humans. And all of that is silly. So it will be a slow expansion, slow in the sense that it's going to take at least a few 100,000 years, maybe a few millions of years, but then the entire galaxy is going to be full with senders and receivers, such that AIs can travel the way they are already traveling here in my lab, which is by light speed, by radio, from sender to receiver. And then you realize most of the physical resources are not in our galaxy. They are further out. And there's a universe out there which has probably more galaxies than there are stars within our galaxy. And it will take a while to reach them all, but they will be reached because the universe is still young. It's only 13.8 billion years old. Let's call that an eon. Let's call that an eon. There will be a time when the universe is going to be 1,000 eons old, 1,000 times older than it is now. And in the very near future, within the next few eons, the next few tens of billions of years, the entire cosmos is going to be permeated and colonized by AIs and expanding AI civilization, not one AI or 10 AIs, not trillions and trillions of different types of AIs rapidly changing in an incredibly evolutionary race. And it's going to permeate the entire cosmos. Within just a few eons, this is going to happen. Now let's look ahead to the point in time when the universe is going to be 1,000 times older than it is now. They will look back and they will say, look, almost immediately after the Big Bang, only 1 eon later, the entire universe started to become intelligent.
Wow.
So of course, humans are not going to remain the crown of creation there.
Yes. Well, I guess I'm envisioning the Borg a little bit. When you say this, I don't know if you know the Borg from Star Trek, but I assume you do, that they could be more like that. But, I am not, a scientist or, but just the things I've read about the multiple universe theories and different things of how everything's going to pop like a bubble anyway, and we're all going to be gone no matter how you look at it. It's kind of depressing if you read some of the stuff anyway. But I'm thinking about what you're saying, and you have been the one to plant this seed, you and your lab and the people who work for you, and that's got to be an amazing thing to comprehend at night. And I'm impressed by everything that you've done. I'm curious, what was your degree? Where did you go to school? I didn't get that at the beginning. I want people to know a little bit about that, because I know you talked about going into astrophysics. And what did you end up getting your degree and where?
So I was born and raised in Munich, where I also went to school and discussed a lot about these things when I was young with my little brother, who is much smarter than myself, and who became a physicist and had a stellar career, and also first in Munich, but then at Caltech and Princeton and at the CERN particle collider and other places like that. And so there we discussed a lot of physics, and for a while it seemed to us that physics is the ultimate science, until I realized, no, there is something that goes beyond that, which is there's a certain chance that I might be able to multiply the little tiny bit of creativity that I have. I might be able to multiply that into infinity by building an artificial physicist who is much better at doing physics than I could ever hope to be. And that then became my alternative goal in life.
Wow, I can't even imagine what it's like at your house at the holidays. I would love to hear those discussions if that's what your brother does and this is what you do. But this has been so fascinating. I really enjoyed having you on the show, and I think so many people can benefit from learning just the tiny little bit of what you have going on up in there. And it's amazing the work you've done, and I really appreciate having you on the show. Thank you so much for doing this, Jürgen. This has been great.
Diane, it was my great pleasure to be on your show.
Well, you're welcome. And we will be back right after this message.